The sky turned red. It wasn't the kind of red that comes with a beautiful sunset. This was different, violent, unnatural. One moment, the world was normal. Cars honked in the streets, people scrolled through their phones, and life moved at its usual pace. The next moment, everything changed. A blinding flash erupted from the sun, so bright it felt like the sky had been ripped open. The light lasted only a few seconds, but its impact was instant. Every electronic device on Earth went dead. Phones, computers, cars, planes, everything. The world fell silent, as if someone had flipped a switch. In a small town on the edge of the mountains, a retired engineer stood in his backyard, staring at the sky. He had seen the flash, felt the heat on his skin. His name didn't matter anymore. Names didn't mean much in a world like this. He was just a man now, a man who knew too much about how things worked, and how easily they could break. The streets were chaos. People stumbled out of their homes, confused and scared. Some tried to start their cars, but the engines wouldn't turn over. Others shouted into dead phones, desperate for answers. The engineer watched it all from a distance, his mind racing. He knew what had happened. A solar flare, massive and unpredictable, had wiped out the Earth's electrical grid. It wasn't just a blackout, it was the end of the world as they knew it. As the hours passed, the panic grew. Stores were looted, fights broke out, and the air filled with the sound of sirens that would never come. The engineer knew he couldn't stay in the town. He had to move, to find somewhere safe. But where? That's when he heard it. A faint beeping sound, coming from the old radio in his garage. It shouldn't have been working, nothing was working, but there it was, a steady, rhythmic pulse. He turned the dial, and a voice crackled through the static. This is a message for anyone who can hear this. If you're out there, if you're alive, come to these coordinates. We have shelter. We have hope. But you must hurry. Time is running out. The engineer wrote down the coordinates on a scrap of paper, his hands trembling. He didn't know who was sending the message or what he would find at the location. But he knew one thing, staying here meant certain death. He packed a bag with whatever supplies he could find, a flashlight, a knife, a few cans of food, and set out on foot. The roads were clogged with abandoned cars, so he stuck to the woods, moving quickly but carefully. He wasn't alone. Along the way, he encountered others, a young woman carrying a baby, a gruff-looking man with a hunting rifle, a teenager who looked like he hadn't slept in days. They didn't trust each other at first, but survival had a way of bringing people together. By nightfall, the group had grown to 6. They huddled around a small fire, sharing what little food they had. The engineer studied their faces, wondering how long they would last. The world had changed, and so had the rules. The world had changed, and so had the rules. Trust was a luxury they couldn't afford, but they had no choice. They were all in this together now. As the fire crackled, the engineer pulled out the scrap of paper with the coordinates. He didn't know what awaited them at the destination, but he knew one thing, it was their only chance. The next morning, they set out again, following the signal. The journey was long and grueling, but they pressed on, driven by a mix of fear and hope. They didn't know what they were walking into, but they knew one thing for sure, the day humanity reached its limit was only the beginning. The group moved in silence, their footsteps crunching against the dry leaves that littered the forest floor. The air was thick with tension, each person lost in their own thoughts. The engineer led the way, his eyes fixed on the small compass in his hand. The coordinates from the radio message were burned into his mind, a beacon of hope in a world that had none. The young woman, carrying her baby close to her chest, walked just behind him. Her name was Anna, though she hadn't offered it willingly. The engineer had overheard her whispering it to her child during the night. The baby was quiet now, its tiny face pressed against her shoulder. Anna's eyes darted nervously around the forest, as if expecting danger to leap out at any moment. The man with the hunting rifle, Tom, brought up the rear. He was a burly figure, his face hardened by years of living off the land. He didn't say much, but his presence was enough to keep the group moving. The teenager, who called himself Jay, walked beside Tom, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his hoodie. He looked like he hadn't eaten in days, his face pale and drawn. The other two members of the group were a middle-aged couple, Mark and Lisa. They had joined the group the day before, their faces etched with grief. They didn't talk about what had happened to them, and no one asked. The forest seemed endless, the trees stretching on for miles in every direction. The engineer kept checking the compass, making sure they were still on course. The coordinates led to a remote area, far from any towns or cities. He didn't know what they would find there, but he hoped it would be worth the journey. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the group came to a clearing. In the distance, they could see the outline of a large building, its walls covered in ivy. The engineer's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the source of the signal. "What is this place?" Anna asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The engineer shook his head. "I don't know. But it's our best shot." They approached the building cautiously, their eyes scanning for any signs of life. The structure was old, its walls cracked and crumbling. A faded sign above the entrance read, "Blackwood Research Facility." The engineer pushed open the heavy metal door, the hinges creaking loudly. Inside, the air was cool and damp, the only light coming from the cracks in the ceiling. The group stepped inside, their footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. The facility was a maze of corridors and rooms, each one filled with strange equipment and machinery. The engineer recognized some of it, computers, generators, communication devices, but much of it was beyond his understanding. "This place, it's like a lab," Jay said, his voice tinged with awe. The engineer nodded. "A government lab, by the looks of it. They were working on something here. Something big." They continued to explore, their unease growing with each step. The facility was abandoned, but it didn't feel empty. It was as if the walls themselves were watching them, waiting for them to make a mistake. Finally, they reached a large room at the end of the hallway. In the center of the room was a strange device, unlike anything the engineer had ever seen. It was a massive machine, its surface covered in blinking lights and dials. A single monitor sat on a nearby desk, its screen flickering with static. The engineer approached the machine, his heart pounding in his chest. He reached out and touched the screen, and suddenly, the static cleared. A message appeared, written in bold letters. "Welcome. You are not alone." The group stared at the screen, their breaths held. Before anyone could speak, the machine let out a low hum, the lights on its surface glowing brighter. The engineer stepped back, his mind racing. "What is it?" Anna asked, her voice trembling. The engineer shook his head. "I don't know. But I think it's trying to tell us something." As if in response, the machine let out a series of beeps, the lights flashing in a rhythmic pattern. The engineer recognized the pattern immediately, it was a signal, a message. "It's communicating," he said, his voice filled with awe. "This machine, it's sending a signal." But to who? The group exchanged uneasy glances. None of them had an answer. Before they could discuss it further, a loud crash echoed through the facility. The group spun around, their eyes wide with fear. "What was that?" Jay asked, his voice shaking. The engineer didn't answer. He didn't need to. They all knew what it meant. They weren't alone. The crash echoed through the facility like a thunderclap, sending a jolt of fear through the group. The engineer's mind raced as he scanned the room for an exit. The machine in front of them continued to hum, its lights flickering in a steady rhythm, as if oblivious to the danger. "We need to move," Tom said, gripping his rifle tightly. His voice was calm, but his eyes betrayed his fear. The engineer nodded, his eyes darting to the door. "Stay close. We don't know what's out there." The group moved as one, their footsteps quick but quiet. The facility was a labyrinth of corridors and rooms, and every shadow seemed to hide a threat. The crash had come from somewhere deeper inside, but the sound had been loud enough to make it impossible to pinpoint its source. As they moved, the engineer couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The facility was old and abandoned, but it didn't feel empty. It was as if the walls themselves were alive, breathing, waiting. They reached a stairwell and descended to the lower level, hoping to put some distance between themselves and whatever had caused the crash. The air grew colder as they went deeper, the walls damp with moisture. The lower level was darker, the only light coming from the engineer's flashlight. "Where are we going?" Anna whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of their footsteps. "Somewhere safe," the engineer replied, though he wasn't sure if such a place existed anymore. They reached a heavy metal door at the end of the hallway. The engineer pushed it open, revealing a small room filled with filing cabinets and dusty equipment. It looked like an office, untouched for years. "In here," he said, ushering the group inside. They closed the door behind them, the sound of the latch clicking into place offering a small sense of security. The room was cramped, but it was better than being out in the open. "What do we do now?" Jay asked, his voice trembling. The engineer didn't answer right away. He was too busy scanning the room, his eyes landing on a stack of papers on the desk. He picked them up, his hands shaking as he flipped through the pages. The documents were old, their edges yellowed with age. They were filled with technical jargon and diagrams, but one word stood out: Project Horizon. The engineer's heart skipped a beat. He remembered hearing about Project Horizon years ago, back when he was still working in the field. It had been a top-secret government initiative, rumored to involve advanced technology and interstellar communication. But the project had been shut down, its files sealed and its existence denied. "What is it?" Mark asked, his voice breaking the silence. The engineer looked up, his face pale. This facility, it was part of Project Horizon. They were working on something here. Something big. "What kind of something?" Anna asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The engineer hesitated. He didn't want to scare them, but they deserved to know the truth. They were trying to contact extraterrestrial life. And I think they succeeded. The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. No one spoke for a long time, the only sound the faint hum of the machine upstairs. "You're saying, aliens?" Jay asked, his voice filled with disbelief. The engineer nodded. "That machine upstairs, it's a communication device. They built it to send signals into space. And I think it's still working." Before anyone could respond, the door to the room creaked open. The group froze, their eyes wide with fear. A figure stepped into the room, silhouetted by the dim light from the hallway. It was a man, his face gaunt and his clothes tattered. He looked like he hadn't eaten in weeks, his eyes hollow and sunken. But there was something else in his expression, something that sent a chill down the engineer's spine. "You shouldn't be here," the man said, his voice hoarse. The engineer stepped forward, his heart pounding. "Who are you?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device, its surface covered in strange symbols. He held it out to the engineer, his hand trembling. "Take it," he said. "It's the key. But be careful. They're watching." Before the engineer could ask what he meant, the man turned and disappeared into the hallway, his footsteps fading into the darkness. The group stared at the device in the engineer's hand, their minds racing with questions. "What the hell is going on?" Tom asked, his voice filled with frustration. The engineer didn't answer. He was too busy studying the device, his mind racing with possibilities. "We need to get out of here," Anna said, her voice trembling. "This place, it's not safe." The engineer nodded, but he knew it wasn't that simple. They had stumbled onto something bigger than they could have imagined, and there was no turning back now. "We'll leave," he said, his voice firm. "But first, we need to find out what this device does. And why that man thought it was so important." The group exchanged uneasy glances, but no one argued. They were in too deep now, and the only way out was through. The device felt heavy in the engineer's hands, its surface cool to the touch. The strange symbols etched into its metal casing seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive. The group huddled around him, their eyes fixed on the object, their breaths held in anticipation. "What do you think it does?" Jay asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The engineer shook his head. "I don't know. But we're about to find out." He turned the device over in his hands, searching for any clues. There were no buttons or switches, just the symbols, which seemed to form some kind of pattern. As he ran his fingers over them, the device suddenly lit up, a soft blue glow emanating from its core. The group gasped, stepping back as the glow intensified. The engineer held the device steady, his heart pounding in his chest. The light grew brighter, filling the room with an eerie, otherworldly glow. And then, it happened. A voice filled the room, deep and resonant, speaking in a language none of them could understand. The words were strange, guttural, and yet there was a rhythm to them, a kind of music that sent shivers down their spines. "What the hell is that?" Tom asked, his grip tightening on his rifle. The engineer didn't answer. He was too focused on the device, which was now projecting a holographic image into the air. The image was faint at first, but it quickly solidified into the shape of a humanoid figure. The figure was tall and slender, its skin a pale, almost translucent blue. Its eyes were large and almond-shaped, glowing with an inner light. It wore a suit of some kind, sleek and metallic, with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change as they watched. The group stared in stunned silence, their minds struggling to process what they were seeing. "Is that an alien?" Anna asked, her voice trembling. The figure tilted its head, as if studying them. Then, to their astonishment, it spoke. "Greetings," it said, its voice smooth and melodic. "We have been waiting for you." The engineer's heart skipped a beat. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice shaking. "We are the Ilarians," the figure replied. "We have been observing your world for many cycles. The signal from this facility reached us, and we have come to offer our assistance." The group exchanged uneasy glances, their minds racing with questions. "Assistance?" Mark asked, his voice filled with skepticism. "What kind of assistance?" The Ilarian's gaze shifted to him, its expression unreadable. "Your world is in peril. The solar event that disrupted your technology was only the beginning. There are greater threats on the horizon, threats that you are not prepared to face." The engineer's stomach churned. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed sent a wave of dread through him. "What kind of threats?" he asked. The Ilarian hesitated, as if choosing its words carefully. "There are forces at work in the universe, forces that seek to destroy worlds like yours. We have the knowledge and technology to help you survive, but it will require a great sacrifice." "What kind of sacrifice?" Anna asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The Ilarian's gaze softened, its expression almost sympathetic. "You must prove your worth. Only then can we intervene." The room fell silent, the weight of the Ilarian's words hanging in the air. The group exchanged uneasy glances, their minds racing with questions. "Prove our worth?" Jay asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "What does that even mean?" The Ilarian didn't answer. Instead, the holographic image began to fade, the light from the device dimming. "Wait," the engineer shouted, his voice desperate. "We need more information. How do we prove ourselves? What do we need to do?" The Ilarian's voice echoed in the room, faint but clear. "The path will be revealed to you. Trust in yourselves, and you may yet survive." And then, the image was gone, the device falling silent once more. The group stood in stunned silence, their minds reeling from what they had just witnessed. "What the hell was that?" Tom asked, his voice filled with frustration. The engineer shook his head, his mind racing. "I don't know. But one thing's for sure, we're in way over our heads." Anna hugged her baby closer, her eyes filled with fear. "What do we do now?" The engineer looked at the device in his hands, his expression grim. "We follow the path. Whatever it takes." The device went dark, leaving the group in stunned silence. The engineer stared at it, his mind racing with questions. The Ilarian's words echoed in his head, "The path will be revealed to you. Trust in yourselves, and you may yet survive." But what did that mean? What path? And how were they supposed to trust themselves when they didn't even know what they were up against? The group huddled together in the dimly lit room, their faces pale and drawn. The encounter with the Ilarian had left them shaken, their sense of reality shattered. "We need to get out of here," Anna said, her voice trembling. "This place, it's not safe." The engineer nodded, but he knew it wasn't that simple. They had stumbled onto something far bigger than themselves, and there was no turning back now. "We'll leave," he said, his voice firm. "But first, we need to figure out what that thing meant. If there's a path, we need to find it." The group exchanged uneasy glances, but no one argued. They were in too deep now, and the only way out was through. They left the room and made their way back to the main chamber, where the strange machine still hummed softly. The engineer approached it cautiously, his eyes scanning the controls. "What are you doing?" Tom asked, his voice filled with suspicion. "Trying to figure out how this thing works," the engineer replied. "If the Ilarians contacted us through it, maybe we can use it to get more answers." He began fiddling with the controls, his hands moving quickly and confidently. The machine responded to his touch, the lights on its surface flickering and glowing. Suddenly, the room was filled with a low, resonant hum. The air seemed to vibrate, and the walls shook slightly. "What's happening?" Jay asked, his voice filled with panic. The engineer didn't answer. He was too focused on the machine, which was now projecting a holographic map into the air. The map showed a series of coordinates, leading to a location deep in the mountains. "That's it," the engineer said, his voice filled with awe. "That's the path." Before anyone could respond, the ground beneath them began to shake violently. The walls of the facility groaned and creaked, dust raining down from the ceiling. "We need to get out of here," Mark shouted, his voice filled with panic. The group didn't need to be told twice. They grabbed their belongings and ran for the exit, their hearts pounding in their chests. As they emerged from the facility, they were met with a sight that took their breath away. The sky was filled with light, brilliant, swirling colors that danced and shimmered like the aurora borealis. But this was no natural phenomenon. The light was coming from a massive object hovering in the sky, its surface smooth and metallic. It was a ship. The group stared in stunned silence, their minds struggling to process what they were seeing. The ship was enormous, its size dwarfing anything they had ever seen. It hovered silently, its presence both awe-inspiring and terrifying. "Is that them?" Anna asked, her voice trembling. The engineer nodded, his eyes fixed on the ship. "The Ilarians. They're here." As if in response, a beam of light shot down from the ship, illuminating the ground a few hundred feet away. The light solidified into a platform, and a figure began to descend. It was the same Ilarian they had seen in the hologram, its blue skin glowing faintly in the light. It stepped onto the ground, its movements graceful and deliberate. The group watched in stunned silence as the Ilarian approached them, its expression unreadable. "You have found the path," it said, its voice smooth and melodic. "But the journey is just beginning." The engineer stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. "What do you want from us?" The Ilarian tilted its head, as if considering the question. "We want to help you. But first, you must prove yourselves worthy." "Worthy of what?" Tom asked, his voice filled with frustration. The Ilarian's gaze shifted to him, its expression almost sympathetic. "Worthy of survival. The challenges ahead will test your strength, your courage, and your unity. Only by overcoming them can you earn our assistance." The group exchanged uneasy glances, their minds racing with questions. "What kind of challenges?" Jay asked, his voice trembling. The Ilarian didn't answer. Instead, it turned and began to walk toward the beam of light. "Follow me," it said, its voice echoing in the air. "The first challenge awaits." The group hesitated, their fear and uncertainty palpable. But they knew they had no choice. They had come too far to turn back now. One by one, they stepped into the beam of light, their hearts filled with a mixture of fear and hope. The journey was just beginning. The beam of light enveloped the group, lifting them off the ground and into the ship. For a moment, everything was blindingly bright, and the world seemed to dissolve around them. When the light faded, they found themselves standing in a vast, circular chamber. The walls of the chamber were smooth and metallic, glowing faintly with a soft blue light. The air was cool and crisp, with a faint hum that seemed to vibrate through their bones. The Ilarian stood before them, its expression calm and unreadable. "Welcome," it said, its voice echoing in the chamber. "This is the first test. It will challenge your ability to work together and think critically. Only by succeeding will you prove yourselves worthy of our assistance." The group exchanged uneasy glances, their hearts pounding. The engineer stepped forward, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "What do we need to do?" he asked. The Ilarian gestured to the center of the chamber, where a large, circular platform had risen from the floor. On the platform was a strange device, a series of interconnected gears, levers, and panels, all glowing with the same blue light as the walls. "This device is a puzzle," the Ilarian explained. "It requires coordination, logic, and trust to solve. You must work together to activate it. But be warned, failure will have consequences." The group approached the platform, their eyes fixed on the device. It was unlike anything they had ever seen, its design both elegant and alien. "All right," the engineer said, taking charge. "Let's break this down. We need to figure out how these parts work together. Anna, you take the levers. Jay, you handle the gears. Tom, you're with me on the panels. Mark and Lisa, keep an eye on the overall structure and call out anything you notice." The group nodded, their fear giving way to determination. They had come this far, and they weren't about to give up now. Anna stepped up to the levers, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped them. "Ready," she said, her voice steady. Jay moved to the gears, his eyes scanning the intricate patterns. "Ready," he echoed. Tom and the engineer stood at the panels, their fingers hovering over the glowing controls. "Ready," they said in unison. Mark and Lisa stood back, their eyes darting across the device. "We're ready," Mark said. The engineer took a deep breath. "Let's do this." They began to work, their movements careful and deliberate. Anna pulled the levers, causing the gears to shift and turn. Jay adjusted the gears, aligning them with the patterns on the panels. Tom and the engineer pressed the controls, their fingers moving quickly and confidently. At first, it seemed like they were making progress. The device hummed softly, the light growing brighter with each adjustment. But then, something went wrong. One of the gears jammed, causing the entire device to shudder. The light flickered, and a low, ominous tone filled the chamber. "What's happening?" Anna asked, her voice filled with panic. "I don't know." Jay shouted, his hands frantically trying to fix the gear. The engineer's mind raced. "We need to reset it." "Anna, pull the levers back to their original positions." "Jay, hold the gear steady." "Tom, help me with the panels." They worked quickly, their movements frantic but coordinated. The device groaned and shuddered, but slowly, it began to stabilize. The light grew brighter, and the hum returned to its steady rhythm. "We're close," the engineer shouted. "One more adjustment." With a final twist of the gears and a press of the controls, the device lit up, a brilliant blue light filling the chamber. The group stepped back, their hearts pounding as the device began to spin, faster and faster, until it suddenly stopped. The chamber fell silent, the light fading to a soft glow. The Ilarian stepped forward, its expression unreadable. "You have succeeded," it said, its voice filled with a hint of approval. "You have proven that you can work together under pressure. But this is only the beginning. The next test will be more difficult." The group exchanged relieved glances, their fear giving way to a sense of accomplishment. They had passed the first test, but they knew the challenges ahead would only get harder. "What's next?" Tom asked, his voice filled with determination. The Ilarian tilted its head, its gaze shifting to a doorway that had appeared in the wall. "The next test awaits. Follow me." The group hesitated, their hearts filled with a mixture of fear and hope. But they knew they had no choice. They had come too far to turn back now. One by one, they followed the Ilarian through the doorway, ready to face whatever came next. The doorway led to another chamber, this one smaller and more intimate than the last. The walls were lined with strange, glowing symbols, and the air was thick with tension. The Ilarian stood in the center of the room, its expression unreadable. "This is the second test," it said, its voice calm but firm. "It will challenge your trust in one another. Trust is the foundation of unity, and without it, you will fail." The group exchanged uneasy glances, their minds racing with questions. What kind of test would challenge their trust? And how far were they willing to go to prove themselves? The Ilarian gestured to a large, circular table in the center of the room. On the table were 6 small devices, each one glowing with a soft blue light. "Each of you must take a device," the Ilarian explained. "Once activated, it will reveal a truth, a secret that one of you has been keeping. Only by confronting these truths can you move forward." The group hesitated, their fear palpable. Secrets? What kind of secrets? And who among them had something to hide? The engineer stepped forward, his voice steady despite the unease in his chest. "We don't have a choice. We have to do this." One by one, they picked up the devices, their hands trembling slightly. The moment they touched them, the devices lit up, projecting holographic images into the air. The images were fragments of memories, scenes from their past, things they had tried to forget. Anna's device showed her standing in a hospital room, holding her baby for the first time. But the image shifted, revealing a man, her husband, lying in a hospital bed, his face pale and lifeless. Jay's device showed him running through the streets, his hands covered in blood. The image shifted to a police car, its lights flashing as it chased him. Tom's device showed him standing in a forest, a rifle in his hands. The image shifted to a group of men, their faces filled with fear as they begged for their lives. Mark and Lisa's device showed them sitting at a kitchen table, their faces filled with grief. The image shifted to a child's bedroom, empty and silent. And then there was the engineer's device. It showed him standing in a lab, surrounded by colleagues. The image shifted to a document, a classified report on Project Horizon. He had been part of it, long before the disaster. He had known about the risks, but he had said nothing. The room fell silent, the weight of their secrets hanging in the air. What is this? Anna asked, her voice trembling. The Ilarian's gaze shifted to her, its expression almost sympathetic. These are the truths you have been hiding. The truths that have shaped who you are. To move forward, you must confront them. The group exchanged uneasy glances, their fear giving way to anger and suspicion. You knew about this? Tom asked, his voice filled with accusation as he turned to the engineer. You knew about the solar flare, and you didn't say anything? The engineer shook his head, his face pale. I didn't know it would happen. I didn't think it was possible. And you? Jay asked, turning to Tom. What about you? What did you do? Tom's face hardened, his grip tightening on his rifle. That's none of your business. The tension in the room was palpable, the group's unity crumbling under the weight of their secrets. This is what the test is about, the Ilarian said, its voice calm but firm. Trust is fragile. Once broken, it is difficult to repair. But if you can find a way to forgive and move forward, you will prove yourselves worthy. The group fell silent, their minds racing with conflicting emotions. Could they forgive each other? Could they move forward, knowing what they now knew? The engineer stepped forward, his voice filled with determination. We don't have a choice. We have to trust each other. If we don't, we're all going to die. The others hesitated, their fear and anger still raw. But deep down, they knew he was right. One by one, they nodded, their resolve hardening. All right, Tom said, his voice gruff. Let's do this. The Ilarian nodded, its expression unreadable. The next test awaits. Follow me. The group followed, their hearts heavy but their determination stronger than ever. They had faced their secrets, and they had survived. But the hardest challenges were yet to come. The Ilarian led the group through a series of winding corridors, each one more alien and imposing than the last. The walls pulsed faintly with a soft blue light, and the air was thick with an almost electric tension. No one spoke. The revelations from the previous test still hung heavy in the air, but there was no time to dwell on them. The final challenge awaited, and the group knew it would be the hardest yet. Finally, they reached a massive chamber, its ceiling so high it disappeared into darkness. In the center of the room was a towering structure, a machine unlike anything they had ever seen. It was a labyrinth of gears, wires, and glowing panels, all interconnected in a way that defied human understanding. The Ilarian turned to face them, its expression solemn. This is the final test, it said, its voice echoing in the vast chamber. It will challenge not only your skills and unity but also your morality. The choices you make here will determine the fate of your world. The group exchanged uneasy glances, their hearts pounding. What do we need to do? The engineer asked, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. The Ilarian gestured to the machine. This device controls a powerful energy source, one that can either restore your world or destroy it. To activate it, you must solve a series of puzzles, each one more complex than the last. But there is a catch. The group leaned in, their breaths held. The machine requires a sacrifice, the Ilarian continued. To fully activate it, one of you must remain behind. The energy it generates is lethal to organic life. Whoever stays will not survive. The chamber fell silent, the weight of the Ilarian's words sinking in. The group stared at each other, their faces pale and drawn. You're asking one of us to die? Anna asked, her voice trembling. The Ilarian's gaze softened, its expression almost sympathetic. I am not asking. I am telling you the truth. The choice is yours. The group fell silent, their minds racing. The engineer stepped forward, his voice filled with determination. We'll figure it out, he said. There has to be another way. The Ilarian shook its head. There is no other way. The machine is designed to test your willingness to sacrifice for the greater good. Only by making this choice can you prove yourselves worthy. The group exchanged uneasy glances, their fear and uncertainty palpable. We don't have time to argue, Tom said, his voice gruff. Let's just solve the puzzles and figure out the rest as we go. The others nodded, their resolve hardening. They approached the machine, their eyes scanning the intricate network of gears and panels. The engineer took charge, directing the group with calm precision. Anna, you take the left side. Jay, you're on the right. Tom, you're with me in the center. Mark and Lisa, keep an eye on the overall structure and call out anything you notice. They worked quickly, their movements careful and deliberate. The puzzles were complex, requiring not only logic but also teamwork. Each success brought them closer to activating the machine, but the looming sacrifice weighed heavily on their minds. As they worked, the engineer couldn't shake the feeling of guilt gnawing at him. He had known about the risks of Project Horizon, and he had done nothing. If anyone deserved to make the sacrifice, it was him. Finally, after what felt like hours, the machine began to hum, its gears turning and its panels glowing brighter with each passing moment. It's working! Jay shouted, his voice filled with relief. But their relief was short-lived. The Ilarian stepped forward, its expression solemn. The final step requires a sacrifice, it said. Who will it be? The group fell silent, their hearts pounding. No one wanted to make the choice, but they knew they had to. The engineer stepped forward, his voice steady. I'll do it. The others stared at him, their eyes wide with shock. No, Anna said, her voice trembling. You can't. The engineer shook his head. I have to. This is my fault. I knew about the risks, and I did nothing. If anyone deserves to make this sacrifice, it's me. The group hesitated, their hearts heavy with grief. But deep down, they knew he was right. Thank you, Tom said, his voice gruff but filled with respect. The engineer nodded, his expression grim. Take care of each other. And whatever you do, don't give up. The Ilarian stepped forward, its gaze shifting to the engineer. Your sacrifice will not be in vain. The machine will restore your world, and humanity will have a second chance. The engineer took a deep breath, his heart pounding as he stepped onto the platform. The machine's hum grew louder, the light growing brighter until it filled the chamber. And then, with a final flash of light, the engineer was gone. The light faded, leaving the chamber in silence. The machine's hum softened to a gentle whir, its gears slowing as the energy it had generated spread outward, rippling across the world like a wave. The group stood frozen, their eyes fixed on the spot where the engineer had been just moments before. Anna was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. He's gone. The words hung in the air, heavy with grief and disbelief. The engineer had been their leader, their guide, and now he was gone. His sacrifice had saved them, and the world, but the cost was almost too much to bear. The Ilarian stepped forward, its expression unreadable. His sacrifice will not be forgotten. The machine has restored your world. The solar flare's effects have been reversed, and your technology is functioning once more. The group exchanged uneasy glances, their minds struggling to process what had happened. What happens now? Jay asked, his voice trembling. The Ilarian's gaze shifted to him, its expression almost sympathetic. Now, you rebuild. The challenges you faced here have proven your worth. You have shown courage, unity, and selflessness. These are the qualities that will guide you as you move forward. The group fell silent, their hearts heavy but filled with a glimmer of hope. The engineer's sacrifice had given them a second chance, and they couldn't waste it. The Ilarian gestured to a doorway that had appeared in the wall. This will take you back to your world. Go, and remember what you have learned. One by one, they stepped through the doorway, their hearts filled with a mixture of grief and determination. The light enveloped them, and for a moment, everything was blindingly bright. When the light faded, they found themselves standing on a hill overlooking their town. The sun was shining, the sky a brilliant blue. In the distance, they could see cars moving on the roads, people walking the streets, and life returning to normal. It was as if the disaster had never happened. The group stood in stunned silence, their minds struggling to process what they were seeing. It's back," Anna said, her voice filled with awe. Tom nodded, his expression grim but relieved. "He did it. He saved us." The group exchanged uneasy glances, their hearts heavy with grief. The engineer's sacrifice had given them a second chance, but it was a reminder of the cost of survival. "We can't let his sacrifice be in vain," Mark said, his voice steady. "We have to make this count." The others nodded, their resolve hardening. They had faced unimaginable challenges, and they had come out stronger. Now, it was up to them to rebuild, not just their world, but their lives. As they made their way down the hill, the group couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but they knew they could face it together. The engineer's words echoed in their minds, "Take care of each other. And whatever you do, don't give up." They wouldn't. Epilogue. Months passed, and the world slowly began to heal. The group stayed in touch, their bond stronger than ever. They had been through hell together, and it had changed them in ways they couldn't fully understand. Anna found a new purpose in caring for her baby, her heart filled with gratitude for the second chance she had been given. Tom returned to the wilderness, his experiences giving him a new appreciation for life and the people around him. Jay turned his life around, using his past mistakes as a lesson to help others who were struggling. Mark and Lisa found solace in each other, their grief slowly giving way to hope for the future. And though the engineer was gone, his legacy lived on. The group often spoke of him, remembering his courage and selflessness. He had given them a second chance, and they were determined to make the most of it. As they looked to the future, they knew the road ahead would be difficult. But they also knew they had the strength to face it, together. The day humanity reached its limit was not the end. It was a new beginning.